The campground at Whispering Pines was known for its quiet beauty. Tall redwoods stretched skyward like ancient sentinels, and the scent of pine needles always lingered in the crisp mountain air. Nestled deep within the national forest, it was the kind of place people came to unplug from life. No cell service, no distractions, just crackling campfires and star-scattered skies. Park Ranger Naomi Ellis had seen a lot in her 12 years patrolling the forest, but the bear always stood out. Every summer, without fail, around the first week of June, a lone black bear would appear at Site 9. Never Site 8. Never Site 10. Always 9. It didn't roar, didn't destroy the trash bins, and didn't threaten campers. It just lingered. Sometimes it would sniff the old stone fire pit. Other times, it would gently nudge the large tree that stood at the edge of the site, its massive paw resting against the bark like it was remembering something. Then, after an hour or two, it would disappear back into the forest without a sound. At first, people were afraid. A bear near your tent was no small matter. But year after year, it did the same thing. Never causing trouble. Never approaching humans. It just returned like clockwork to that one piece of forest, looked around like it was searching, or mourning, and left. The regulars began to call it Ghost Bear. Naomi didn't believe in ghosts, but she did believe in patterns. And this bear's behavior wasn't random. Animals didn't have calendars, but somehow this one always came back at the same time, to the same place, in the same exact way. There was something different about this summer, though. The bear arrived late, nearly 2 weeks past its usual visit, and it looked older, thinner, slower. Naomi watched it from a distance, binoculars pressed to her face, heart oddly heavy as she noted the way it limped slightly on one paw. It approached the fire pit like always, but instead of sniffing and moving on, it lay down beside it. Not in a predatory crouch. More like a resting dog. Like someone coming home after a long journey. Campers at nearby sites peeked curiously from behind RV windows. One boy tried to take a picture, but Naomi quickly waved him off. "Let it be," she whispered aloud, though no one was close enough to hear. She didn't radio it in. Not yet. Instead, she waited. Watched. Wondered. Why this spot? Why always here? And what was the bear hoping to find? When it finally stood up to leave, after nearly 3 hours, it did something that stopped Naomi cold. As it turned, it paused and looked right at her truck, right at her, with a gaze so deep, so sad, that Naomi's hand froze on the binoculars. There was no growl. No huff. Just eyes that seemed to recognize. Then the bear lumbered back into the trees, swallowed by green shadows and shafts of evening light. Naomi sat in the silence for a long time, unsure why her chest ached so badly. She made a note in her logbook. Bear returned. Site 9. Limping. Stayed longer. Looked directly at me. And then she underlined the last 3 words 3 times. Because this wasn't just a coincidence anymore. This was the beginning of a story. A story no one had told. Yet. 8 years ago, Whispering Pines was almost shut down for the season. Wildfires had scorched parts of the forest just west of the campground, and while the flames never reached the central sites, the smoke was heavy enough to drive most tourists away. Naomi, only 4 years into her role as park ranger then, had been reassigned to monitor what few guests remained and help the Forest Service log damage. That's when she met Emily and her father, David. They were quiet campers, just the 2 of them in an old teal-colored dome tent pitched at Site 9. David was in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and a cautious smile. Emily was around 10, maybe 11, and utterly fascinated by the forest. She wore oversized hiking boots and a ponytail that stuck out of her baseball cap like a feather. When Naomi stopped by to check on them, Emily had peppered her with questions. Do bears really like honey? What kind of tree is that? Can I be a ranger too? They planned to stay a week. Naomi remembered how David had explained it was their first trip since Emily's mother had passed the year before. She loved the outdoors, he'd said softly, glancing at his daughter. We're trying to make new memories in old places. 4-5 days, it had gone beautifully. Emily hiked every trail she could. David cooked simple meals over their fire. Naomi brought them extra marshmallows after Emily said s'mores were basically forest magic. On the 6th day, everything changed. It was early morning, mist still clinging to the underbrush, when Naomi got the call on her radio. Possible animal encounter, Site 9. She raced down the winding trail in her truck, heart pounding. When she arrived, the scene was eerily still. David stood near the fire pit, pale and shaking. Emily was nowhere in sight. "It was a bear," he said, voice raw with panic. "A cub." Emily saw it at the edge of the clearing and followed it. "I turned my back for 1 second, 1 second." Naomi didn't wait. She grabbed her tranquilizer rifle and emergency pack and plunged into the woods, tracking the small footprints that disappeared into the dew-soaked ferns. Nearly an hour later, she found them. Emily sat cross-legged at the edge of a shallow stream, talking quietly to a small black bear cub who sat just feet away. The bear looked young, maybe 6 months, its fur still fluffy, its movements unsteady. There were scrapes on its side and a gash on its hind leg, probably from thorns or another animal. Naomi froze behind a tree, afraid to spook either of them. She listened. Emily was saying, "You're not scary. You're just lost too, huh?" The cub didn't move. "I get it. I miss my mom too." Something about the way she said it cracked through Naomi's chest like thunder. Eventually, Naomi made her presence known, carefully coaxing Emily back while calling in a wildlife medic to treat the injured cub. Emily begged to stay until help arrived, and Naomi, against all protocol, allowed it. When the cub was finally tranquilized and taken for treatment, Emily placed a small pine cone beside it in the crate. "For comfort," she whispered. That bear, later named Echo by the rescue team, was released back into the wild 6 months later. Its mother had likely died in the fire, leaving it to wander alone. Emily never saw the bear again. But exactly 1 year later, a black bear appeared at Site 9. No one thought much of it at first, just another curious visitor. But it came again the next year. And the next. Naomi hadn't told Emily. She hadn't seen the family since that week. But in her logbook, she began marking the return visits under the same name. Echo. Now, 8 years later, that same bear was back, older, slower, still drawn to this exact place. And as Naomi watched it resting beside the old fire pit, she realized something she hadn't considered before. Maybe Echo wasn't just remembering. Maybe he was waiting. Naomi didn't want to believe it at first, but Echo's yearly visits weren't random. Each year, around the second week of June, the bear would appear near Site 9. Always alone. Always calm. Never aggressive. The first couple of years, she logged it as a coincidence. There were dozens of bears in the forest. Maybe this one just liked the spot. But over time, a pattern emerged. Echo never approached other campsites. He avoided noisy families, turned away from food left out in the open, and settled quietly near the old fire ring. Even as he grew larger and more powerful, now nearly 400 pounds with a thick black coat, his demeanor remained gentle. Observant. Almost expectant. Naomi started setting up a motion-sensitive camera across from the campsite. What she captured astounded her. Echo would come at night, just after dusk. He'd sit in the same patch of dirt, facing the old tent site. Sometimes for 20 minutes. Sometimes for hours. Once, during a rainy evening, he curled up under a pine tree and didn't leave until morning. He never damaged property. Never dug through trash. Never showed any aggression. In her 12 years as a ranger, Naomi had never seen behavior like it. One summer, she decided to stay late after her shift. She brought a fold-out chair, a thermos of coffee, and waited in the dark. Just past 9 p.m., the bear arrived. He paused at the tree line, scanned the empty site, then ambled forward and sat, just a few feet from the fire pit. Naomi didn't move, barely breathed. He wasn't just visiting. He was remembering. As the wind rustled the pines and the last birds called from the canopy, Naomi whispered, "You still looking for her, aren't you?" Echo's ears twitched at her voice, but he didn't turn. The next day, Naomi looked through the park's digital archives. Photos, guest logs, old permits. She found the campsite booking form from all those years ago. The name. David Langston. She remembered him clearly. The quiet man with tired eyes. The devoted father who once told her his daughter believed bears understood more than people gave them credit for. Naomi wondered if David or Emily had ever returned to the site. They hadn't. She would have known. On impulse, she did something risky. She wrote a letter. She didn't know if the address David had given was still valid, but she kept it short and simple. Dear David. This might sound strange, but I think your daughter's bear comes back to the campsite every year. Same week. Same spot. Same stillness. I thought you should know. Naomi, ranger at Whispering Pines. She mailed it and forgot about it, until 3 weeks later, when a small envelope arrived at the ranger station. The handwriting was neat. The return address was from Oregon. Inside, a single page. Typed. Naomi. Thank you for your letter. I wasn't sure whether to believe it, but I read it to Emily anyway. She cried. It's been a long time. She asked if we could come back this year. We'd like to reserve Site 9. David. Naomi stared at the note, stunned. Then slowly, she smiled. Echo had been waiting. And soon, someone might finally come back. David Langston hadn't returned to Whispering Pines in over 10 years. But that June, as requested, Site 9 was reserved under his name. Naomi watched from a respectful distance as the old silver SUV pulled up. David stepped out slowly. His hair had gone gray, but his frame was still strong. From the passenger side, a young woman emerged, mid-teens, maybe older, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and sunglasses. It was Emily. And when Naomi saw her walk with a slight limp and keep one hand close to her chest as if guarding a memory, she knew this wasn't just a visit. This was a return to something sacred. David recognized Naomi immediately. Their hug was quiet, firm, filled with everything unspoken. She insisted, he said, nodding toward Emily. Said she wanted to thank him. One last time. Naomi swallowed the lump in her throat. I hope he comes. They set up camp just as they had years ago, tent on the flat patch, chairs by the fire pit. But this time, there was an air of fragile anticipation. That night, they waited. And just as the first stars broke through the dusk, the forest stirred. A massive shape moved at the edge of the trees. Echo. Naomi stayed hidden behind the ranger cabin across the path, binoculars in hand. She saw the moment Echo emerged. Saw how Emily gasped, tears flooding down her cheeks. She took a step forward, but David gently held her back. Echo looked older now. His gait slower. A small scar ran along his shoulder. But he was unmistakable. He paused. Stared. Then sat. Emily knelt in the dirt and whispered something Naomi couldn't hear. It was perfect. But the next morning, Echo was gone. Not just gone, disappeared. No tracks. No scat. No broken branches. Naomi checked every trail cam in the area. He never showed. Days passed. Then weeks. The Langstons went home, hearts full from the encounter. But Echo didn't come back. Not the next night. Not the next week. By July, Naomi was concerned. Echo had never vanished like this before. Always, he lingered in the forest nearby for a few days, watching, circling, returning. But this time, it was as if he'd been swallowed by the earth. She filed a report with the Forestry Service, flagged the ID tag, and asked nearby rangers to watch for activity. Nothing. No sightings. No signs. The forest felt emptier. In late August, after nearly 2 months of silence, Naomi hiked deep into the northern ridge, where the bear territories overlapped with no man's land. She found scratch marks on a tree. High ones. Old. Possibly Echoes. But near them was something else. Blood. Dried and faint, but definitely blood. A few dark hairs caught in a bramble confirmed it. Something had happened. Possibly a fight. Maybe a wound that got infected. Maybe. She refused to finish the thought. Naomi sat under the tree where the blood had dried into the bark and whispered, "You didn't deserve this. Not after all you gave." The wind rustled the trees. And the forest, for once, didn't feel like it was listening. Naomi couldn't let go. Echo's disappearance gnawed at her like a splinter beneath the skin, small, invisible, but constant. She wasn't just a park ranger anymore. She was his witness. His steward. And now, she felt like she had failed him. For weeks, she combed through the forest in quiet pursuit of answers. She reviewed every wildlife camera, cross-referenced animal movement patterns, and asked locals and hunters if they'd seen anything unusual. Nothing. It was like Echo had simply vanished. Until one day in late September, an email hit her inbox, subject line. Bear ID hashtag B7826, possible sighting, Dagger Hollow. Naomi's heart skipped. The GPS collar Echo had once worn had died months ago. But the ID tag embedded beneath his shoulder, microchipped, was still active. Someone had picked up a faint handheld scanner ping in Dagger Hollow, a part of the wilderness nearly 40 miles away. It wasn't his territory. He had no reason to go there. And that meant only one thing. He had a reason now. Naomi set out the next morning. Dagger Hollow was remote. No roads, no cabins, no cell signal. Just raw, twisting forest. She hiked 6 hours through dense underbrush and cold wind, crossing fallen trees and narrow ravines. She found signs quickly. A snapped branch. A flattened grass bed. Old paw prints. It was Echo. But something was wrong. His prints were uneven. Wobbly. Like he'd been limping. She followed them, heart in her throat. Then she found it. Not Echo. Something else. A shallow den, carved into the earth beside a fallen cedar. Inside were bones, not animal, but bird and rodent. Scatterings of fur. A few half-eaten mushrooms. And in the far back corner, a pile of something that looked like cloth. She crawled inside and pulled it free. It was a child's hoodie. Blue. Faded. Ripped at the sleeve. Inside the pocket was a rusted pink plastic whistle. Naomi froze. She knew that whistle. It had been on the missing persons report 8 years ago. Madeline Weaver, age 6. Disappeared during a family hike. Never found. They'd searched for days. Hundreds of volunteers. Dogs. Helicopters. They'd assumed she'd fallen. Maybe taken by a cougar. But the body had never turned up. Naomi stared at the whistle. It had scratches. Bite marks. Like it had been carried in the mouth of something. Large. A bear. She dropped to her knees. What if Echo hadn't just visited that campsite out of instinct or nostalgia? What if he had seen something that day? Or done something? The old Echo was a gentle soul, Naomi was sure of it. But a bear, no matter how familiar, was still a wild animal. Even kindness could become dangerous in the wrong moment. Had he found Madeline before the humans did? Had he tried to help? Or was it something else? She needed more. Naomi camped near the den for the night, torn between fear and awe. In the early hours, as mist curled low around the trees, she heard something. Footsteps. Heavy. Measured. She slipped out of her tent slowly. And there, at the edge of the fog, stood Echo. He looked ancient now. His fur was dull. One eye had a cloudy haze. A large wound scarred his flank, still raw-looking. But he stood strong. Their eyes met. Naomi took a cautious step forward. "You're alive." Echo made a low rumble. Then, to her astonishment, he turned and looked toward the den. Naomi followed. He stood beside it, pawing gently at the dirt. Then, he lay down beside the entrance, as if guarding something sacred. As if, still waiting. Naomi sank to her knees. "You knew her, didn't you?" Her voice cracked. "You carried this for years." The whistle. The hoodie. All preserved. Echo hadn't run from humans. He had run to the place he thought she'd return to. Still mourning. Still watching. Still remembering. And that was the secret. This wasn't just a wild bear who returned to a campground. It was a grieving guardian, bound to a memory no one else understood. Naomi reached forward slowly. Echo didn't flinch. They sat like that for a long time, an old ranger and a wounded bear, tethered by a secret too wild for words. Naomi returned from Dagger Hollow with more than just evidence. She came back with a story too heavy for most to believe, and too sacred to sensationalize. She filed her report quietly. No press, no spectacle. Just facts. Microchipped bear B7826 confirmed alive in Dagger Hollow. Den discovered with possible human child artifacts. Pink whistle, blue hoodie. Presumed connected to the 2017 Madeline Weaver case. Bear not hostile. Behavior suggests protective, memorialistic pattern. But there were some things she didn't write. Like how Echo had rested his head near the hoodie, like he was still waiting for her return. Or how his eyes had looked older than time itself, not wild, but deeply aware. Winter returned to Cedarfield with biting winds and heavy snow. It had been months since Naomi last saw Echo. And then, one December afternoon, she got a call from the campground warden. "You'll want to see this." Naomi arrived to find tracks, large bear prints, pressed into the freshly fallen snow. They led through the trees, circling the old fire pit, and stopped in front of campsite number 14, where it all began. There was something left there. The pink whistle, gently placed on the tree stump beside the fire pit, as if set down by human hands. But it couldn't have been. There was no one else around. And the prints, only bear. Naomi knelt beside the whistle. Her breath caught in her throat. Was this Echo's final visit? A goodbye? Or was he still trying to leave a message? She looked out into the trees, heart thudding. "I see you, old friend," she whispered. News of the recovered whistle and Naomi's quiet report eventually reached the Weaver family. They hadn't camped in years. Couldn't bear the memories. But after reading the story, something shifted. The mother, Claire Weaver, reached out. Naomi met her quietly, without uniforms or ceremony. She handed Claire the whistle. The woman crumpled with emotion. "She never went anywhere without this," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. She said it made her feel brave. Naomi hesitated, then gently added, "I believe a bear found her. I don't know exactly what happened, but I think he stayed with her. I think he mourned her." Claire looked up. "A bear?" "Yes. He kept coming back to this place. Every year. Like he was remembering." There was a long silence. And then Claire whispered, "Then he's the only one who didn't forget her." The park made no official statement. Naomi insisted on it. Echo's story wasn't a headline. It was a legacy. Over the following years, sightings of the old bear became rarer. Rangers reported glimpses at twilight. A shadow moving along the ridgelines. A single bear paw print found near a frozen creek. But Naomi knew his time was nearing its end. And one day, when the snow was deep and the stars were bright above the campsite, she walked the path alone. No visitors. No cameras. Just her. At campsite number 14, she found it waiting. A circle of smooth stones around the fire pit. And in the center, nestled gently, a single sunflower. Madeline's favorite flower. Naomi knelt down, hand over her mouth. A tear slipped from her cheek and froze before it hit the earth. Echo was gone. But his heart had never left. Years later, long after Naomi retired, the park quietly renamed campsite number 14. No plaque. No brochure announcement. Just one wooden sign carved by hand. Echo's watch. And if campers ever woke at dawn and swore they saw a great shape in the trees, watching with gentle eyes before melting into the mist, well, the Rangers never confirmed it. But they never denied it, either. Because some bonds don't fade with time. Some stories don't need to be shouted to be true. And in the stillness of the pines, the wind sometimes carries a soft breath, like the sigh of a bear who never forgot the girl he couldn't save, and the ranger who made sure no one else forgot him.